Kelly Yee, and I'm the Associate Chair and Director of Clinical Training of the PsyD program. I'll be talking a little bit about mindfulness and well-being, and this was actually my dissertation research here at Sophia back in, I graduated around 2008. So I'll be summarizing this. So a little bit about my own background with mindfulness. Back in about 1992, if you look at that first picture up there, I went to high school in Southern California at a place called Agora High School. And during my experience there, I was in a relationship, it didn't work out, and just through the suffering, really, of that experience, I was searching for something, and I came across meditation. So that was my first exposure to meditation, and from that point, I got very much interested in meditation. And then from that point, actually, I went to UC Santa Barbara. That's the middle picture there, and I studied a lot of comparative mysticism, comparative religion, and psychology. And I started getting more and more deeply into different meditation practices, different mindfulness practices during that time. And eventually, I attended a retreat by a Vietnamese Zen master. His name's Thich Nhat Hanh. He's pretty well known. He got nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King Jr. So I got so inspired by the retreat that I did with him. It really just touched my heart really deeply. There was one moment during the retreat where I was just sipping tea. It was about the fourth day of the retreat. It was a silent retreat. And I was staring at this tree, and I was so struck by the beauty of the tree and so present in the moment. And it felt like, wow, this is really what life's about. I got so inspired that I considered becoming a monk in this lineage. So I actually went to France for a bit and spent some time there. And while I was there, I still felt this sort of inspiration and this drive to want to research mindfulness and also go to graduate school in clinical psychology. At the time, mindfulness wasn't really big. It was about 1997, 98 when I was considering these things. It wasn't really being researched at the mainstream institutions. And I knew here that was really valued and that I could actually research this. So because of that, and I think we have a history of that. If you look at the dissertations, say in our library, or the dissertation topics that students do, they're very kind of cutting edge and very forward thinking in terms of the topics. So I knew I could do that here, so eventually I did come here to research mindfulness. And I'm going to summarize some of the research that I did. So just to start, here I want to present this question, what is mindfulness? And in some ways, this is a picture, this is probably me looking for copyright-free images to do this PowerPoint, actually. So in a lot of ways, this is an example of what isn't mindfulness, right? So when we're not mindful, we easily get very reactive, actually, by the circumstances, either externally or internally. We have a high degree of reactivity and just sort of automatically reacting to whatever is happening. So that's one component I found in interviewing the people that I was talking to about their experience with mindfulness and well-being. And the people actually that I did interview, I forgot to touch on that, they were long-term mindfulness practitioners or mindfulness teachers, and all of them had quite a bit of mindfulness experience. And what stood out with these people that I interviewed, they were exemplars of mindfulness based on this one scale, the mindfulness attention and awareness scale that I gave to this group of people, of mindfulness teachers and practitioners. And then after giving that scale to different people, I chose the people who actually rated the highest in mindfulness to interview them with their experience of mindfulness and well-being. So that's one component that they reported, is this kind of reactivity to experience, or reactivity to our interior experience, or reactivity to external experience. Another component of what isn't mindfulness is this sort of automation. So it's like this automatic pilot that we can go into in different moments. And basically when we're in that mode, whatever our history is, whatever our conditioning is, we just sort of act that out in our everyday lives. So that's another component of what isn't mindfulness. And then another component is the sense of disconnection. So as people aren't mindful, they're kind of reactive and feeling just like they're running on automatic pilot. A lot of times people can feel this sense of being disconnected from themselves, disconnected from others, and disconnected from the world at large. So that's another quality of not being mindful. And one last piece of not being mindful is the sense of identification. So a lot of times when we're not mindful and just we're very identified with our thoughts and our emotions, and there isn't a sense of space or a sense of awareness with our interior thoughts and emotions. So this is another quality that the interviewees reported on when they're not mindful. So from that point, usually, when people get exposed to mindfulness, there is this shift. So an example right now, like all of you can kind of tune into your experience right now, and notice that there is an aspect right now of you that is conscious, that is aware, and that is present. And it's actually an aspect of you that you don't even have to try to really make happen. It's just there, it's just registering. For example, if you tune into my voice right now, there's an aspect of you that is registering the sound of my voice and the words that I'm sharing. So that's really that kind of mindful, aware aspect of you. And what happens is people, once they start to shift, a lot of these kind of patterns that's not mindfulness begin to shift as well. So, so it is a natural part of you, and then also though, you can cultivate that part, and that's really what's happened in Silicon Valley. That's really what's happened internationally with the spread of a lot of different mindfulness practices. And really, mindfulness has a very long history, 2,600 years, usually associated with Buddhism. And throughout that time, actually, within Buddhism, there's a lot of different practices that have been used to really cultivate that aspect of you. And from that moment of that shift to that kind of momentary mindfulness, right, when you can shift into that present, clear space of your awareness, it can become much more sustained, actually, through practice, to the point where it seems like it can be even pervasive throughout all the moments of your life and all the moments of your day. So that is a shift that a lot of these interviewees reported, that mindfulness much more became almost like a natural state of their being, and a natural place of operating in the world. And then from this place of sustained mindfulness, these are some of the qualities or principles that really seem to contribute to well-being. So one quality is the sense of openness. So right now, as we're sitting here, if you just tune into your experience and say you're just open to the experience of your body in this moment, notice what happens inside. So you just shift your awareness and you're just open to whatever sensations are there in your body. can shift and open to your sense of the breath in the body right in this moment. So what's interesting about that sense of openness, right, where you're just kind of open to whatever sensations are there in the body, whatever sensations are there in the breath, what's interesting about that, if you look at psychopathology, this is across different disorders, anxiety disorders, PTSD, various disorders, there's a common element of experiential avoidance, and that's really the opposite of this of openness. It's this pushing away or turning away from some aspect of experience, but within mindfulness, you're actually turning towards experience and you're opening to it. So it's actually not surprising that with current research, they're finding more and more that this mindful aspect of working with our experience is really contributing significantly to well-being. That's one dimension that the interviewees mentioned. So this is another dimension of it, non-evaluation, right? So if you look at this picture, here's the sun, and the sun's just lighting up, basically, the environment. Right? Actually, the sun constantly is just radiating that light upon the earth. In the same way, with the non-evaluation, there's two main dimensions to it. So one aspect would be, in certain moments of being really mindful, actually the evaluative mind, the part of our mind that's constantly chitter-chattering, saying this or that or the other thing, with mindfulness, it can actually go quiet. So that's one aspect of this non-evaluation, that chitter-chatter mind can actually just drop away in moments, and really it would just be whatever is, and very present with our experience. So another part of the non-evaluation, and they cultivate this in some forms of psychotherapy like dialectical behavior therapy, therapies like that. You can actually have that kind of word box in the mind, the part of the mind that's constantly talking, but you can just describe experience very objectively. So right now you might do that, right? Like whatever you're experiencing in this moment in your body, you could just have that part of your mind, the verbal part of the mind, just describe it very objectively. Or just very clearly describing the situation here. Here we are sitting, we're listening to a talk, and just whatever you're perceiving, right? So that way of not evaluating your present experience also is a way of cultivating well-being through mindfulness. So it's another dimension. So another dimension actually that I was surprised to hear about is this quality of connection. And I was surprised to hear about it because in my own mindfulness practice, historically I thought of mindfulness as just this bare awareness or bare attention. So this kind of pure awareness is how I thought of mindfulness. But I kept coming across different interviewees, and they kept talking about this quality of connection. And it's interesting too, if you think of mindfulness as connection, actually can change your experience of mindfulness also. So and it really does make sense. So again, as we tune into our experience and we attend mindfully to something, say our own bodies in this moment, it evokes a sense of being connected to the thing that we're attending to in a lot of ways. And also, not just internally, right? I think one of the beautiful parts of being human and being on this planet is our connections with other people. So the same thing, that same mindfulness can be directed outward, right? This non-judgmental, caring attention, loving attention in a lot of ways. And as that awareness goes outward, immediately, the moment I do that right now, I start feeling connected with you all. And whoever I look at, it's like, wow, here's a miracle of the universe. Here's a miracle of another human being. And with that, there's almost a sense of curiosity, right? It's like, wow, here's like this mystery of the universe right before me in a lot of ways. So that's another quality that a lot of the interviewees shared, is this quality of connection that tended to mediate the sense of well-being in their experience. So here's a picture of a biker, and you notice his head's super small, right? So when you think of this, so a lot of times when we do things, there's a tendency to just get lost in whatever we're doing, right? So one example would be like, if I'm moving my hand like this, or riding a bike, or running or something, actually there's different parts of our brain and nervous system, as you're doing that, they actually repetitively, actually the conscious part of your brain and your nervous system turns off, and that action just repeatedly runs on its own, actually. You don't even have to initiate anymore. So a lot of times when we're not mindful, that's kind of how we're living life in a lot of ways, which is normal and natural to a degree. But when you do integrate this mindful awareness component to your actions, it can be very different. And how this picture kind of depicts it is that actually the verbal mind and that sort of running chatter that typically a lot of times can run our lives can get very quiet, and that awareness with your action can be much more integrated. So that's so there's different mindfulness practices. For example, one example would be, a typical one is like mindful walking. So if I was doing a mindful walking practice, rather than how I would typically walk, you know, say I'm just thinking about something and walking around like this, rather than doing that, I would really consciously tune into the experience of walking. And I might even note in my mind, it would be something like lifting, moving, placing. Lifting, moving, placing. So that's one example of a mindfulness practice that's really designed to cultivate this sense of conscious volition, where we're not just automatically reacting to situations and different stimuli in our experience. And another, and this really, it lines up with the traditional literature within Buddhist psychology, but another thing that people mention is the sense of discovery or insight, right? So with this principle, for example, one of my interviewees, she felt really triggered actually by one of her coworkers, and just whenever she was around the coworker, she wouldn't feel well and felt kind of off or something like that. And there's one moment that she described to me where she decided just to be really open and mindful to her emotional experience. And it just really clearly came up. She wasn't aware of this before. It really clearly came up in her experience. Oh, wow, I'm really afraid of this other person, right? So there was some sort of personal insight. So that's one aspect of how mindfulness can lead to well-being, is the sense of personal insight into your experience. Another aspect, which is more emphasized in more traditional, I'd say, Buddhist psychology, are these universal insights. So a typical one in terms of Buddhist psychology is you're paying attention, for example, to your body and your body sensations, and you're just noticing actually that everything's impermanent. You're directly investigating. You're investigating your hand or your sensations of your face, because usually our sense of identity a lot of times is tied into, we feel like we're behind our face somehow, right? So you investigate the head, the chest, the entire body, and all you're doing is noticing the sense of impermanence. So this principle here, discovery, insight, it can be in the people I interviewed, could either be more of a personal insight, right? Something like a psychological insight, but but it can also be the sort of universal insight, something that actually transcends our personal experience. Because actually, if you look at it, if you investigate inside, if you investigate outside, pretty much everything is impermanent. Even though there's some schools that say there is this, think oh, actually awareness itself maybe is not impermanent, but then in terms of investigating it. So that's what's really interesting about some of these contemplative psychologies. It's very much empirical, but empirical from a first-person perspective, empirical from your direct experience. So that's what I'd say is maybe a little bit different than some other views around some of this stuff. And another principle, and this is similar actually to the discovery and insight one, is this principle of understanding. So with this principle of understanding, it's like taking the insights, but rather than just a moment of insight, this principle of understanding is more about seeing patterns, right? So it's actually linking. You see these two folks up here looking at the different panels. It's actually linking this element of time and starting seeing patterns in your personal experience and the world and the interaction between your personal experience and the world. So that's more of this principle of understanding. Another principle is this this piece of deconditioning. And what this refers to is when mindfulness is really established, some of our habitual patterns that we typically engage in, they actually start deconstructing in a lot of ways. So the folks I talked to, one woman, again, talked about how her personality, the more deeply she got into mindfulness, it was like her personality was getting deconstructed, in a sense almost like taken apart. So for her, it was almost a shift, right, from more functioning from this like personal sense of smaller self within her mind to this more bigger sense of this, almost like this open ground of awareness that became the basis of her living and operation in her everyday life. So this deconditioning quality or principle has a way of whatever we've grown up with, whatever we've sort of, it has impacted us as we've grown, has a way of deconstructing that, actually almost clearing that out from our experience. Just a few more, I think I have a couple minutes left. I'll run through these real quickly. Another quality discussed is this quality of knowing in the moment. So right now, if you notice this mindful part of you right now, there's a quality of it that you know, right? It's not an intellectual knowing. It's not like, oh, I think I'm sitting here in this room and therefore I'm sitting in the room, like a sort of logical knowing, right? It's this direct knowing, because when awareness is directly in the presence of something, for example, if your awareness right now is directly aware of the sense of your body in this moment, you know your body's there, right? You don't have to think about it. You don't have to theorize about it. It's just a direct experience of being here in the moment. So that's another quality. And one of the last ones here before I wrap up is equanimity. So if you see this dog, he has this sort of balanced calm, right? And that's another quality that the interviewees talked about. One fellow talked about going to the dentist. He actually didn't use the Novocaine that numbs your mouth. And he decided to make this like a meditation experiment. And what was notable is it's not that you don't feel. Actually, with mindfulness, you feel more, right? But with that feeling more, there's this sense of calm, this sense of peace, the sense of non-reactivity that's there with whatever you're experiencing. So that's an internal form of equanimity. There's also an external form of equanimity, and that's actually having a sense of equal care to whoever you interact with. That's actually one of the prime practices that the Dalai Lama practices. And you notice when he meets people, it's like, he tears up just connecting with whoever, right? And that's this practice of having equanimity externally. And just real quickly, this is a model of what I just went through. And I think that's about it. I'll give way to Shilpa now. She'll share her experience of mindfulness being a student at the school.